welcome to Anarchykart, part 4 of our build series. If you're not sure about what the Anarchykarts are, these are Europe's first road legal converted go-karts. So we have shown you in the other 3 parts how to put one of these on the road. Now, this episode is going to have changed completely from what we originally planned out. It's thrown us a real curveball today. So we were meant to be going out and showing you us driving these around and having some fun on the road with them, but this engine has just seized on me on my way home. It is sea solid, it dumped all its oil out the bottom, and yeah, that's the end for it. So it's left me with a real split decision to make. And that split decision was, I can either put another engine on here. Now these are only cheap, they're only about £100 for a GX160. They're quite a common engine, so they're not hard to come by. Or I can go and start putting my GSXR engine on out of our smashed up motorbike that you've already seen. So to me, it was a no-brainer. I'm going to go and put my GSXR on it. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is get this onto my welding bench and start stripping it all the way back down to a bare frame. And we're going to start stripping the motorbike down and offering them up together to try and make these as one. If you're not sure about the rest of the build on these, please make sure you go back and have a look at the other 3 parts of the build blog. But this has got road legal tyres, road legal brakes, it's got handbrake on it, it's got turn signals, it's got lights, it's got all of those things you'll need for an MOT, and we've shown you the whole build process before on that. But what I'm going to do now is strip this down and start getting my GSXR on it to make it even faster. So welcome to the Jigsaw build corner. Now, the reason I'm going to use my welding table is I'm going to put the frame completely flat against my table and I'm going to brace it down to it as well. And the reason for that, it means that there's going to be no twist and no roll. So when I'm actually fabricating onto it, it can't really go anywhere. So it's going to keep it as level and as flat and as straight as possible. Now, the other thing I just want to talk about is this. Now, this wasn't seen on the previous episodes. This is something we were going to introduce on this part anyway. Now what I've done is I've actually welded these upright onto the rear bumper, and then these come just across the engines, and this mounts my spoiler on the back. Now this may change again, but I wanted to show you this because this actually gave us the ability to raise the brake light up and also put my indicators onto the uprights as well. This brought it into the height requirements and stuff for the MOT and the MSVA, and it was a lot tighter than the previous design I had. So I just wanted to show you this, and this will hopefully be used again, and I'll get this powder coated to match the frame when everything is finished. Right, so here it is, the Donut GSXR 600. Now, in earlier episodes, you will have seen me getting this running for the first time after the accident. Now, it is back, it's in the garage, and I'm going to start taking it apart, ready to combine it with the go-kart. The GSXR is kind of half stripped down now, and I'm starting to get towards actually removing the engine mounts. What I've done is I've left as much connected as I possibly can, and the reason for that is when it moves over on the go-kart, I don't want to be looking at all the wires I've disconnected and kind of chasing faults back. I want to just leave it connected so it still thinks it's a motorbike. So when it's in the go-kart, I can just fire it up and get it running. The other thing you may have seen is I actually just cut the chain off using a grinder. The reason for that is the chain will be getting shortened anyway, or it won't be getting used at all. So I didn't want to go through the process of actually removing everything and taking it off properly. It was just easier to disconnect it and I can get moving again. So what I've done here is I have ratchet strapped the front wheel to my big heavy workbench that the go-kart's on. That's actually kept it upright, so it's now off the side stand. And I've knocked a couple of pieces of wood underneath here, so that's kind of supporting it underneath the exhaust and also the engine. And what I'm going to do next is obviously undo the engine mount and try and drop it out as a single cluster. So I've just removed the first engine mount bolt, which is just here, but there's actually this obviously manufacturer specific kind of castle nut on here. Now I don't have the right tool for this, so I'm gonna have to improvise, but obviously I'm not gonna use this putting it back together, and it's not something that I have to be particularly careful of, so I'm gonna kind of hit it with the air hammer and see what happens. There we go, the GSXR engine is out and on the deck. Now all this would need right now is a battery, and this will fire up and sit here and run. So yeah, really nice, small little package and ready to go into the go-kart. I've kept all of the electronic ignition on, absolutely everything with it, and a big thanks to Al, who came over just for the wheels off the frame and ended up dropping this out with me. So huge thank you to Al as well. So the next thing is I'm going to try and move this back and then start putting the other additional bits onto the frame and work out where my engine mounts need to go. Right, so I now have my GSXR 600 engine out and on the blocks, kind of ready to rock and roll. My frame for my go-kart is on here. Now, I was planning on doing the entire build on the bench here to keep everything level, keep everything out the way, so I wasn't kind of going into my car area where the ramp is. But as you can see, the bench just isn't long enough, especially not when I've got to actually mount the engine behind the seating area on this. So it's going to end up overhanging, it's going to turn into a disaster, not to mention the fact that it's going to get really heavy on top of the bench as well. So, complete change of plan. This weekend, I'm going to be throwing it down on the floor and I'm going to mock everything up and try and get some tack welds in and try and turn this go-kart back into a roller. I'm going to drill a couple of holes into the back. Then I'm going to be putting a whole go-kart frame on the back. And to decide how much of that I'm going to be putting on, I'm going to put the engine behind the seat first. Now, I want to keep this as short as possible. So what I want to do is try and get the radiator kind of behind my head on this. And then I'll use some heat matting and a heat shield behind my back on the actual seat. The reason I want to do that is I want the wheelbase short and I want to use all the go-kart structure on the back, which is why I'm using another frame and welding it to it. It's a bit of a strange way of doing it, but what it does is it keeps this as a registered chassis and frame, and I don't want to alter that. So you can always add on, it's like you adding a roll cage onto something or adding some more structure onto your chassis. As long as the original basis is there, you can strengthen it and you can extend it. It's the same as a limousine. As long as you don't change that actual kind of original structure, if you were to add for instance, another axle on the back, it's exactly the same as that. I'm adding structure on. So I'm going to start to move the engine over to the back here, and then I'll get my other frame moved to the back. There we go. How cool does that look? So yeah, proper buzzing now. I've got a GSXR 600 kind of ready to go in my go-kart. The radiator is where I thought it was going to be, which is right behind here. I'm hoping my body won't kind of cut off too much of the air, but I do want this as close or as far forward as I can to keep the wheelbase nice and short on this. Now, when it comes to joining the frames, this is what the magic is going to be. Now, this tube fits perfectly to the internal dimension of the chassis and also to the other chassis that I'm going to be adding onto the rear. So what I can do is put little segments of this and it'll join the two through, making a super strong join between the two chassis. But yeah, how cool does that look? So here we go, this is my donor frame. Now these frames are different manufacturers, but I have checked and the tube size is exactly the same, so it's going to work brilliantly. Now what I'm going to do is, as soon as this kind of straight section of the go-kart finishes, that's where I'm going to cut it across. And I'm not just going to scrap the front end. These lovely bended parts here, which would normally hold the steering column, I'm actually going to use those to mount the engine. So I'm going to use these as my engine mounts to bring it back down to the frame and link it in to both go-karts. What I'm going to do as well, obviously you've got seat uprights here. I'm going to use these as my kind of gearbox mounts. So it's going to start to tie all of the frame in. But again, using these go-kart components, which are going to kind of amalgamate the two different structures together. It'll give everything loads of strength, but it'll also look very in keeping, rather than looking like I've just built box section all over it. So first things first, let's do the cut across the front and then start pilfering this for more parts. Okay, so with a few little tweaks, you can now see that this frame is actually lining up along here, which is exactly what I wanted, exactly what I planned. I've had to bend this a little bit, but it's kind of by the by. I knew I was going to have to move these brackets, but I'm trying to leave them on as long as I can. So if I can use them, because obviously it's not far away from that gearbox mount. So if I can keep that there and just put a little bit of flat bar joining the two together, it avoids kind of messing with this rear structure too much and just putting loads of things on that really in my eyes are unnecessary. If there's already a mounting point there, which is already double braced, let's use it, let's use all this structure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to drill the holes in the rear of my original frame. Now these are going to be the main mounting points. So I'll drill a hole straight through into the previous bar, put my little bit of tube in, weld that around, and then put my joining piece of frame onto the back. Okay, so that is the welder on, and what I'm going to do is tack weld all of these little bars in place and then mount it back together, check all my measurements before I go for the big welds and join these two frames together for the final time. So that is two frames now into one. It's going to need welding up from underneath as well, but I'm going to kind of hang fire on that for the minute because I don't want to keep taking the engine in and out. I want to take it out once more and that be the end of it. So what I'm going to do is move on now to some of the engine mounts and gearbox mounts. If I can get some of those kind of mocked up and in place so it holds the engine, when I actually take the engine out the next time, then I'll be able to weld them all up all the way around and make a really, really neat job of it. For now though, I just want to get all of the engine mounts in place so it is held in position. So that's the whole engine tacked in place now. So all the engine mounts are on. I've managed to get mounts for the gearbox. I've managed to mount all of the engine, and I've used a lot of the actual framework from the orange go-kart frame as well. So got a nice shape to it. I've flattened off a couple of ends as well, and it all looks really nice. Now when the engine comes out, I'll be able to tidy up everything. At the minute, everything's just kind of tacked in place. It's not the prettiest, but now's the time to pretty it up, and the engine is pretty much mounted. Right, just trying to gear myself up to actually lift this engine out. It's heavy, all the mounts are in, I don't want to bend anything, and that engine's heavy, and I'm trying to work out how to do it. My engine crane isn't here at the moment, so it's just one of those where I'm like, yay, gotta have them all at it, but as soon as it's out, I can get these mounts all welded up, and then the engine's ready to go back in for the final time. Okay, so as far as examples of how not to lift an engine out, that is a pretty fine example. It's having the wrong tools, but I may do. It is out. I know I've got water and antifreeze and stuff everywhere, but there's no damage to the engine and it's out. So yeah, mission achieved. It's now time to jump on the frame. I'm going to weld it up good and proper and make this thing bang on.
Living life, every day, late at night, not okay, all I want, and I pray, all I need.
So I'm going to go with it's on. All the mounts and stuff have kind of lined up. When I did the major weld on them, a lot of them had flexed, so there was a lot of tweaking to do when the engine actually got put in place. I'm going to have to manoeuvre it a little bit more because I can see it's very slightly off centre, so I'm going to get a big bar and flex that over, but it is officially on the go-kart. It is as one. So yeah, really happy. I've been on this 3 hours, which is pretty cool actually, considering it went from normal frame up to extended and Gixxer engine on board. There's not a lot to do really to get this running, but for now what I'm going to do is focus on the rear axle and do those final tweaks around that rear, because there's one more gearbox mount that I want to get right the way down the bottom, and I'm going to strengthen the rear too, because on the final fit, the one on that far corner didn't actually work as well as I thought it would, so I'm just going to abandon that. I'm going to have one for the upper gearbox mount and one for the bottom, and I'm going to put a bar across to actually join the two together to strengthen those up. And then as well, the strengthening post I put across those two, when it had all bent and flexed, it just wasn't in the right position, so I've had to break that. And what I'm going to do is put a little brace in there and weld that across, because having them kind of linked together just gives a lot more strength. If you think when these are in a motorbike frame, they're all linked together by the frame. So I've got to kind of do a similar thing with this. But yeah, it is honestly absolutely rock solid on there. So I'm really, really pleased with it. The exhaust actually gives the height, so everything matches uniformly all the way underneath. I probably will put some sort of skid pan there to stop the exhaust getting hit, because this being very low to the ground, it does kind of bash the frame and you kind of hit your bum now and again as well, because that forms the base of the kart. But yeah, it's on. How cool is that? So yeah, next thing is tweaking the rear axle. So I found the steel which is going to be for the joiner across here to give the triangulation. Now that's that, but then I kind of went, oh, I forgot to get any additional pipe work to match up to this. But then I realised that these old tracking gauges down the back, which I have still never used, and they've been sat there years. So I'll have a little measure, and the tube at the bottom of this is the same thickness as the go-kart. So I'm going to be dismantling this, nicking the tube off my old tracking gauges, throwing the rest of it in the bin, and then I can extend this frame all the way to the back. Okay, so I've now got enough tubes on, so I believe the car is strong enough so I can go and have a little bit of fun on it. As I said before, I am going to put some more plates on here and kind of dimple dye them and tie the frame in a little bit more. But at the minute, I want to go out and have a ride on it. And as well, it's strong enough to have that fun without it breaking. And I can do that when all the engine and everything's out of the way. And just tidy it up just that little bit extra and get really stuck into it from behind as well. Because there's only so much I can weld in, because this is really heavy and I can't tip it over on my own. So what I'm going to do now is try and sort the rear axle out. So the rear axle's still got all the little sprockets on it. So I'm going to strip all of those off and try and actually fabricate the chain. And I've got a split link to join it back together. Okay, so I think that is going to be the gear shifter for now. Now, there is a bit of tweaking to do on it as well, because it's got a little bit of movement side to side. But what I've got is this rod here with my clutch on the front, and that way I can bang shift it through the gears. So that's it, just up and down changing gear. It's a little bit hard going forwards, but I think this is just going to be one of those finicky things I'm either going to have to live with or change it as I go and adapt things. But for now, I'm really pleased with it. What I'm actually going to be doing now though, I'm going to have a little tidy up, and I'm going to try and fire this up. And the reason being is I haven't heard this in like weeks and weeks and weeks now, and I want to make sure it's still running and kind of cure any other little issues before I go any further. And to be fair, I just want to sit on it with it running. Here is the first big adjustment or change of plan I've come across with this, putting the Gixxer engine on part, and it is going to be the seat. Now, the reason for this is, first of all, I need something to mount this tank to, because at the minute it's on this hinge, which is great, but there's nothing here to actually mount to. The second thing is the radiator. The radiator, again, needs something to mount to just here. And then what I found is by sitting in this fiberglass seat, that because the exhaust manifold is right here, my back is getting really warm, and that's just with it sat here on tick over. So I'm going to go with this Kirky seat. Now, these Kirky seats are based on a kind of aircraft design from a long time ago. They're a great seat, they're beautifully made, and they're all aluminium. Now, this is going to do two things for me. The weight isn't going to go up that drastically. I've got somewhere to actually mount these things onto, and I've also got a metal shield in between. And this one has actually got all of the covers on here as well, so it's going to make it a bit softer, because when you're out on the road, obviously you feel absolutely everything with having no suspension. So to me, this Kirky racing seat achieves so much to making this go-kart that next step with the bigger engine. That is it for this episode of the Anarchy Garage. Join me next time where I'll be finishing off hopefully the Anarchy Kart and getting it out on the road.